All right, folks. Well, unfortunately, I was denied the opportunity to stay in Hawaii, so I am back, unfortunately, or fortunately for some of you. I don't know which way you want to perceive that, but back as always. With me is Sean Shapiro, and we wanted to kick off today's show with just a quick update on the interview that Sean did last week with University of Michigan women's hockey coach Jenna Trubiano. And so, Sean, I think he had a quick update on the story since the recording came out last week.
Yeah, just I wanted to I figure as we're doing this regularly, we should kind of just keep the news cycle moving on things as we have them. But so last week we had Jenna on, talked great conversation about Michigan women's hockey, the potential varsity Division I program there. And it was this week, Jenna had a meeting, I believe it was on Tuesday, or maybe Monday, with Michigan Athletic Director Ward Manuel about the feasibility study and how the feasibility study is effectively it's in the build up to it. I don't know who is doing the study yet. It could potentially be College Hockey Inc. I've reached out to both University of Michigan and College Hockey Inc. to see if it's them. College Hockey Inc., to give people a quick backstory, is a nonprofit that handles these feasibility studies. They were the ones that recently did the University of Delaware's that led to them getting women's hockey. And so that should be within a couple weeks. That should start. And essentially where it will go is it will look at the bottom line will be what is the cost point for the University of Michigan to field a competitive women's hockey program. That is effectively the question that will be asked. What is the cost point? They'll look at things like conference. We know Michigan conference-wise is going to have no issues at all. It'll probably be in the WCHA joining either Ohio State and Wisconsin, but they'll also talk with the CHA. I've heard that those conversations, any women's college hockey conference is going to flip over backwards to get Michigan. So that's not going to be an issue. They're a good travel partner. Recruiting is not going to be an issue with the state. The key question is effectively going to be the feasibility study. The bottom line number that will come back to the University of Michigan AD, the president, the regents, that they'll have to effectively decide on is what will the cost be to make sure Yost is upgraded to host two Division I teams and to have the space right now for the ice to have for it all to work. And that's going to be what's going to come back. So we will see. We should have an answer hopefully soon. And we'll have the feasibility study soon. And then these things take about 2 to 3 months once they get started for people to research them. So we have that kind of update. And I figured if there's anything from you, Prashanth, obviously, because you had a much deserved, hopefully, I'm sorry that Hawaii didn't let you stay, but I hope you had to listen to it, and I was wondering if there's anything you had to add after listening to Jenna's conversation or anything, since a quick pullback to the last show, I'd give you that opportunity before we dive into other things today.
Yeah, I mean, for those that have been paying attention to the story, I mean, this is just a long time coming. Like, it is inexcusable that it's taken really this long to get to the point where they're finally vetting this, to legitimately do this. I mean, there's really no excuse why a program like the University of Michigan has not supported a women's hockey team before now, at the varsity level. And so all I can say is kudos to Jenna for continuing, to push with this and for all the work that they've done there. And honestly, kudos to you, Sean, for advocating to pull her on the show to just talk about the story and shed some light and give people a little bit more of an inside look as to what's been going on. And so it was tremendous being able to offer that interview to folks while I was out last week. So yeah, at the end of the day, we'll keep our fingers on the pulse for this story, and hopefully there's a happy ending here with the University of Michigan having a D1 varsity team in the very near future.
And ideally, too, right? We've talked a lot about the University of Michigan. Ideally, this is the type of thing that is the kind of ball rolling for other schools in the state of Michigan. That's kind of the hope here, right? Like you look at in Minnesota, there's basically every Minnesota school that's got a men's team. Most of them have a women's team as well. So ideally, it's kind of going and raising the sport to that level. So hopefully that is that is something that we can report on further in the future. That being said, let's present kind of day in action. We're recording. This is a Thursday. We're about halfway through. Not halfway through. We're kind of, some series we're halfway through of round one, depending on whether how teams go. Or every series, I believe, has now played 2 games after Dallas and Vegas played last night and Edmonton and LA played last night. And one of the things I wanted to kind of open the floor to you with was, we've talked a lot on this show about sample size, and we talk a lot about which metrics we should use and how to properly take the quantity of when it's data that can either be actionable or something we read into. Because it's one of the popular things right now, right, is people are paying closer attention. They're going to they're in their game coverage. It's funny to me. I sometimes see people go and pull data from Natural Stat Trick, or it's more common now. I think it's a good thing that people are doing that. But I kind of wanted to throw it to you, when it comes to a playoff series and it comes to postseason, which, in your mind, when it comes to figuring out the right sample size and applying to which metrics and things like that, what are some of the pitfalls that we should kind of avoid? I'll let you kind of give us the do nots first before we go down the do's.
Yeah, playoff series are an entirely different beast from regular season analysis, and I'll kind of explain and lay out the situation here first. So the first thing we have to talk about is, are we talking about descriptive statistics or predictive statistics? So descriptive being, we're going to describe what has happened. Based on the game that we just watched, these are the metrics that we saw. This is what happened in the game, but we're not drawing any sort of inference about what's going to happen in the next game. And that's the purpose of a descriptive analysis there. Then the second aspect to it is predictive analysis. So based on what we've seen, this is what we expect to happen moving forward, or this is what we predict to happen moving forward in future games. What we've seen really from the most prominent analysis of these different metrics being Corsi, which is, the total shots taken, including shots on goal, missed shots, block shots. We've had looks at expected goals, and then we've had looked at Fenwick, which is just unblocked shots. What we've seen really is that the sample size builds up quickest for Corsi, which makes sense. It includes every type of shot. And that allows Corsi to more quickly reach its quote-unquote maximal predictive value, if you will. And from regular season looks at this, we see that happens maybe about 10 to 20 games into the season, versus expected goals for tends to take about 20 to 30, because we can only calculate an expected goal, or the probability of a shot going into the net, off of an unblocked shot. So we don't have the same sample size that we do as Corsi, and it doesn't build up as quickly. So all that being said, that's regular season analysis. That's getting our perspective on a team's predictive ability moving forward in terms of who are these good teams, who are the bad teams, who are the teams that are sort of average. And it's taking us, about 20 games to really get that. In the playoffs, we're not going to get 20 games, and you're getting every game's against the same team. The adjustments are different. The matchups are different. And really, this is going to be the most vibes-based quote I'm ever going to say, but I was listening, I think it was Ryan Callahan on one of the broadcasts, and he's going, by the time you get to game 3, it's not about systems. It's not about matchups. It's not about what people are doing. It's about will at that point. Who wants it more? Because these teams, they know each other. They know their systems. You're not making radical adjustments. You're not making on-the-fly changes that are going to have dramatic impacts. It's simply who's going to go out there and will themselves to that victory more. And that's what makes the NHL playoffs so entertaining. The best team doesn't always win. The best team wins, 50% of the time, less than 50% of the time. And so that's what's so rewarding about watching this. So for me, personally, throw everything out. There is nothing that's going to be predictive of what we're expecting to see happen. I mean, look at this. Dallas was a fan favorite for everybody Vegas coming in as the 8th seed. Now, obviously, Vegas and their ability to bring Mark Stone and Tomas Hertl and whatnot all back at the same time. But Dallas is down 2-0 in that series and hasn't looked particularly great. But at the same time, I'm not going to try and predict anything moving forward. Same thing in the Toronto and Boston series. Toronto hasn't had William Nylander play a single game yet. If you had said that, I don't think anybody would have expected Toronto, to be as tightly competitive as they've been so far. They probably should have been able to take Game 3, but they weren't able to there. So, it's all very, very interesting, but I don't think there's any metrics that we can use to predict performance. We can really only describe what happened, and sometimes it's very, very much lines up with what you see, like the Hurricanes Game 2 against the Islanders, where they outshot the Islanders by 82 Corsi attempts, which is just the most unbelievable difference I think I've ever seen, and that ultimately led to them winning 5-3. But playoffs, whole different beast. There is no magic bullet here, in my opinion.
I think you're kind of, the way you laid that out for the people, descriptor versus predictor is a good one here, because I think that's something where a lot of the numbers, a lot of these things are things that maybe we pull out after a series, pick any series right now. Like, I'll just say LA Edmonton, since that's the one I rewatched some of this morning while I was waiting for the shuttle to get the car back to my house. At the end of the series, it'll be interesting to look at whoever wins that series. Obviously, it's 1-1 right now. LA tied it up last night with the overtime one. It'll be interesting to take a look and see one of these teams will advance, and one of these teams will probably have been the quote-unquote better team over 7 games. It will be interesting to see how well those line up. And I think that's kind of the thing here. And I think that maybe as you advance in the playoffs, it's something where you use it to tell the story, but you can't really necessarily use it to predict things, right? Like, let's pick a series. We know that I feel pretty confident the Rangers are going to advance, right? I feel pretty confident the Rangers are going to advance against the Capitals. We can talk about how the Rangers advance. We can talk about how they controlled the game. We can talk about looking back as we talk about their next series. But the next series will be a different opponent. It will be a different style. It'll be different. It's kind of, we have to remember the quality of the opponent. We've talked about quality of competition for players before. We also have to keep this in mind for teams too. So from my perspective on this, it's kind of something that I'm trying to keep in mind myself as we advance, and as a writer, as I look at series going forward, I want to be able to better use these tools to help tell the story of how a team got somewhere. But what they did in round 1 isn't necessarily at all going to be indicative of, hey, now this is going to be something for round 2. We're going to see this type of predictive thing. Like, I think that's an important thing that I'm A, saying it out loud on this podcast to remind myself, and B, give anyone else out there, anytime they see me using a bad faith number, they can now call me out on my bullcrap and then point straight to this clip here.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting, because even if you wanted to take the regular season numbers and use them to inform what we would expect to have happen, I don't think a lot of people realize the New York Rangers are 23rd in 5-on-5 expected goals for percentage this season, and the Capitals were 24th. So you're almost expecting that to be just looking at those metrics, and you're saying that those are, those are going to be predictive of what we have happen. That's a tight series, but that hasn't been a tight series, and we're not expecting it to be a tight series because the Rangers have obviously a lot more talent, and in the games that we've seen played thus far, they've really dominated the Capitals, and the Capitals have had no business in there. Same thing with the Boston and Toronto series. Toronto was 9th in Evolving Hockey's 5-on-5 expected goals for percentage. Boston was 17th. You would expect Toronto to be able to control play maybe a little bit more, as they're about 5% better in that expected goals for percentage, but that hasn't been the case from what we've seen. Even in, Game 3 that was just played on Wednesday night between Boston and Toronto, Boston's coming out 54% against the Leafs. And so I think in this realm, I'm not using anything to really try and predict what's going to happen moving forward. But I am using it exactly how you just said, and I'm describing what I saw happen. So we can say that in Game 2 of the Hurricanes-Islanders series, the Islanders had that game under control. They were up 3-0, and through the first couple periods, I'd say really through the first 30 periods, the Islanders were kind of playing the Hurricanes even. And then over the last 30 minutes is when things got out of control and the Hurricanes absolutely took over. And that's almost indicative of that, okay, if you're going to have that level of shot disparity, eventually you're expecting those pucks to go in, and it helps you tell the story at the end. But I don't think at any point anyone would have said, okay, predictively speaking, I'm expecting the Hurricanes now to carry that forward and steamroll the Islanders in the next game, because every game is a new game. And I think we're getting to the point in the series where it is more about willpower than really using any metric to say this is what's going to happen in the next game.
The one other thing about the playoffs that's really interesting I was curious, so I picked the brain of an AHL coach. I won't say who because they speak to me confidentially on things. To be clear, it's an AHL coach that does not work for either of the teams that I cover most regularly. So don't go bothering Dan Watson or Neil Graham about this. It is neither of them. And so I was speaking to the AHL coach about this, and he said one of the things from a playoff series perspective when it comes to adjustments was it's at the end of the day, you can make probably, his terminology was you can make probably 2 tweaks from game to game. He said it's like you've played 82 games or 76 games or whatever they play in the AHL now, right? He's like, and in a playoff series, you can take data from game 1, you can take observation, you can do whatever you want. But if you try to overload players and you try to do, hey, we're now going to do this, this, and this, you're just going to fall apart. And so he said, he said the simplest thing as a coach is you can make maybe 1, maybe 2 tweaks. And he kind of compared it to like a talking point. It's like, okay, you know what? We know on the penalty kill, they like to take away our flanker. Okay. So we want you, player X, to move a bit more. And that's about it. And it was an interesting perspective to hear from him on that, where it's the ideology is these teams know each other, everything like that. And even if you wanted to be like this whole like flip the chessboard type thing, you can't do it because all of a sudden all your pieces are going to get confused and you're just going to make matters worse. So that's something that I was just thinking about kind of watching these games, where it's also one of the things that's made the Vegas team so fascinating to me is we don't know, like every other series we've had, these lines have played together at some point. This is the first time we're seeing Mark Stone and Thomas Hertl play together. That's been one of the fascinating things to me. Very rarely do we get to see that in a playoff series where guys actually have to find chemistry. And like while Vegas is up 2-0 in the series and they combined for they kind of effectively combined together in the most simplest manner on the power play goals in game 1. Stone and Hertl, you're watching them last night and you're like, I'm still not seeing the connection here yet. And it's kind of one of the things that's made the Vegas series kind of a fascinating wrinkle to all of this, because it's one of the few where something actually gets to evolve a little bit that we didn't know from the regular season. But overall, it's playoff hockey. You can make a tweak here, you can make a tweak there. Maybe you can do something with one guy or a player. If anything, the other thing he said, maybe the one position where you can actually look at making a tweak, and it's only if you have a goalie who can mentally handle it, is maybe you speak with that. And this coach also brought up, he said, one of the reasons he loves what Boston's doing is you have to prepare differently for Ullmark and Swayman. That is a natural change you get to bring in that the other team has to worry about from game to game. Your team knows how to handle it. They've handled it rotating every single game since February. The Maple Leafs, from a perspective of, and it's not changing, it's a lot but at the end of the day, the Leafs are dealing with a natural change from game to game right now with the goalie rotation. And it was another interesting perspective there.
Yeah, and I just want to add one other kind of clarifying point. That's not to say that like none of this matters. Like, no, you obviously still want to be the team that has a better expected goals for percentage. You want to be the team that has more shots. You want to be the team, that's generating more chances. Like, let's just be clear on that. What I am saying, though, is just because you get that is not going to ensure you win because of the nature of the playoffs. It's the same team that you're playing, in a 7-game series, and a lot of it comes down to just willpower. And you can see this, to an extent, as you go back and you look over the years at like who actually ended up in the finals, like last year, Vegas and Florida, I think were the 5th best and 11th best teams of the 16 in 5-on-5 expected goals for percentage. But we know Florida got there on the back of their goalie because Bobrovsky was unbelievable last year in the playoffs. And that's what, allows you. And that allows you to be the equalizer. And we've seen that over years and years and years. I mean, going back all the way to the 2003 Ducks was, Sebastian Jaguar. And it's like, that's not, the Ducks got steamrolled in just about every series, but Jaguar was on another level. And we've seen that, time and time again. And you can go back and look. And so at the end of the day, it's a very good descriptor. You obviously want to be that team. Doesn't mean you're going to win. And so that's the beauty of the playoffs. And that's why everybody watches. And that's why, there's this prevailing theory that the Stanley Cup is the hardest trophy to win in all of sports because a lot of it is just willpower.
Yeah. Now, I think that's a great segue. We've got a guest coming on. Do you want to do the intro for the guest or you want me to do it?
I'm going to toss it to you since you got this one booked for us.
Yeah, we are bringing on Eric Lowe he's a senior manager at ESPN for NHL coverage. We'll make sure we get all those titles right when he's actually on the air with us. But looking forward to this one. He's someone who one of the reasons I reached out to bring him on in the first place was he's part of the scheduling, and that's been a fascinating thought for me in my head right now as we figure out these how these schedules work and everything like that. So we'll bring Eric on here now. Okay, happy to be joined today by Eric Lowe from ESPN. I want to make sure I'm get the title right. You're the Senior Manager of Programming and Acquisitions, and he handles the NHL portfolio at ESPN. If I got that right, we can continue with the interview. All good there?
All good, Sean. Thanks for having me.
So it's, as we were talking before the call came on, we're all watching lots of playoff hockey right now. Games were... Then there's only 2 games tonight. There was 3 last night, 4 the other night. And one of the things that kind of comes up with everything right now is scheduling. And I kind of want to just open there. As someone who has a understanding and hand in and figuring out how all this scheduling works, I wanted you to kind of take me through how do we get to, hey, there's a game at 7:30 on ESPN2 or this. Like, kind of take me through how the scheduling... how it works here.
Sure thing. Yeah, no, it's actually almost seemingly a year-long process to get to this point. Obviously, you determine the end point of the regular season, and then you kind of build from there. For the past couple of years, the playoffs have started on a Monday night. This year, kind of unique, where the NBA playoffs and the Stanley Cup playoffs both began on the same weekend, and most notably on the same day. On Saturday, April 20th. And so from there, it's a little bit of a game of availability between us and TNT here in the United States. So, the opening day of the NBA playoffs for ESPN is one of our big tentpole days, across our networks where we have, upwards of 4 games from the NBA that help fill out ESPN and ABC. And so knowing our availability on our networks is tied to the NBA playoffs, it seemingly would fit that TNT or TBS had availability on their networks to begin the playoffs. And then from there, it's really about putting the NHL in spots where it can succeed, knowing that the NBA playoff schedule is pretty much set between us and Turner. It's we actually refer to it as a square dance between us and TNT when we try to balance NBA playoff windows and NHL playoff windows between us and TNT. And I think we've come across some nice gains year over year this year with us beginning the playoffs on Saturday. And we saw on Sunday with our opening day of the Stanley Cup coverage between ESPN and ESPN2, we saw some significant gains year over year for game ones across our networks. So we're off to a great start. The games have been fantastic. Plenty of action, couple of OT games late night. Just, it's been a lot of fun thus far.
Why is the NBA schedule is it a more set one first? Like, why is that the NBA schedule kind of is the thing you're working around in the first place? I'm just Kind of,
Yeah, the
put me in
NBA
other-
playoff schedule is set. They have their set windows. That deal has been in place for a handful of years now. And so, it makes for building the Stanley Cup playoff schedule here in the U.S. A little bit easier, knowing the roadblocks or pitfalls that we have to kind of maneuver around. But that being said, there is a lot of conversation that's taken into account, not just for us here in the U.S., but Rogers up north in Canada having to get what they need with their obligations as well, which is unique to hockey. There aren't any other international considerations when it comes to NBA playoff scheduling, but with regard to the Stanley Cup playoff schedule, there's a lot of things that need to be checked off north of the border as well as here in the U.S. to make sure that everyone's getting the games that they need and maximizing the amount of eyeballs that can tune in and watch Stanley Cup playoff hockey.
What's that been like for? I mean, how much is it? Do you talk to the Rogers folks? Is it just kind of the NHL's the third part? Like, what's that kind of like? Because obviously, I would imagine for them, it's a pretty heavy. There's more Canadian teams this year, right? So like, what's that like?
Yeah, so this year with 4 Canadian teams all being in the playoffs in the first round, and also none of them are playing each other, so they're spread out amongst 4 different series. It creates a unique challenge, but at the same time, those venues up in Canada are certainly worth tuning in to see, even if you live down here in the United States. The whiteout in Winnipeg is a sight to behold every year. But the conversation is really a collaborative one. We're in year 3 of our 7-year deal with the NHL. We think things are growing very swimmingly. And we've got great partners north of the border, with Rogers. They, certainly, help with, boots on the ground up there. We collaborated with them with All-Star Weekend up in Toronto, which also was a nice, test run for us with it being our first All-Star game that we've produced, north of the border as well. And so these conversations, we've been talking playoff scheduling since I think mid-January, just trying to figure out what's the best path forward. We're not only juggling the game schedule itself, but these venues also, I think there's 5 venues right now that both have Stanley Cup playoff teams and NBA playoff teams. New York, Boston, Denver, LA has 3 with the Lakers, Clippers, and Kings. And then the Mavericks and the Stars down in Dallas. The NBA playoff schedule does have an impact on where we can schedule Stanley Cup playoff games and vice versa. And so, all of these conversations are ongoing. We've been doing a lot of scoreboard watching over the past few weeks to see, who's a home seed in the NBA or who's a home seed in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And then, there's all sorts of other, ancillary events that go on in these venues that also are, they're building conflicts that we have to navigate around, whether it be concerts or graduations. All of these multi-purpose facilities have a lot of events in them, especially this time of year. And the full transparency between us, the NHL, Rogers, TNT, it's on full display, just trying to make sure that the whole jigsaw puzzle comes together perfectly.
You mentioned you call it a square dance between you and Turner for kind of some things. What's the internal square dance like, though? On the nights where there's 4 ESPN games, and one starts typically at 7, one's at 7:30, there's an ESPN2 game, and what goes into picking what gets ESPN, what gets ESPN2? I know that might sound silly, but that's the type of thing that I randomly find fascinating.
No, of course. We're our overall scheduling strategy at ESPN is to try to put the best premier events on ESPN, and then ESPN2 gets utilized as an alternative outlet as well. And so there was a conscious effort when we acquired the rights back in 2021 and for the first playoffs in 2022, that the mania effect that goes into the Stanley Cup playoffs first round like, let's make sure that we're staggering the start time so that there's continuous hockey action, whether it be on ESPN and ESPN2, or if it's on ESPN and TNT or TBS. We never want intermissions to all hit at the same time when you are at the pinnacle of the season for hockey. And so, there's been a real joint and collaborative effort to ensure that we're staggering start times. On top of that, when it comes to ESPN or ESPN2, for example, we have plenty of research and viewership data to suggest that, the most watched teams such as the Bruins or the Penguins or the Rangers or whoever, they tend to get slotted on ESPN. And then if we have another matchup that's probably of a little less audience projection, that ends up over on ESPN2. And so, with that, obviously, how we schedule ESPN and ESPN2 with regard to 7 and 9:30 or 7:30 and 10 kind of depends on the late city and who's hosting that game, right? If it's Dallas, say, in the late window like it was last night, almost ensures that the early game has to go at 7 o'clock with a 9:30 Eastern time, 8:30 local start following that. But we try to make a concerted effort to ensure staggered start times. And the beauty, I think, of this past weekend was that you saw every Stanley Cup playoff game, the 6 games that were played over the weekend, they all had their own exclusive window, whether it was on TBS or ESPN or ESPN2. No game overlapped with one another, and it let it breathe, and all hockey fans could focus on one game at one time. And I think that's why you saw such huge numbers for opening weekend across the networks.
With you kind of mentioned staggered starts, and I want to take things back a little bit into the regular season because it's a great segue here. I know this season there was the Frozen Frenzy event where it was all 32 teams played, 16 games. I think the only reason that there was any overlap was because there was an ice issue in Columbus or something like that, if I remember correct. I think there was something along the lines of that.
It added to the frenzy, rescheduling a game on short notice. That's for sure.
Kind of take me through how something like that comes together, because that's one of those things where you hear about how this is an idea that ESPN goes to the league with, and to kind of take me a little bit through something like that, how these kind of using that as kind of the case study for how these collaborative projects between a broadcast partner and a rights holder and the league all work together to bring something like that to here.
Yeah, sure. We had an idea about, it was a little over a year ago. But the idea kind of surrounded, our holistic approach with our NHL rights portfolio, because we have all the outer market games on, Power Play on ESPN Plus. It dawned on me one day that, there's a unique opportunity here for an ESPN Plus subscriber to really get the full experience coast to coast for NHL hockey on a given night, where we could essentially own the night. And so pitched it to the league. They were certainly embracing of it, and we tried to figure out the best path forward to how to stagger the starts roughly 15 minutes apart, beginning at 6 o'clock on ESPN with Toronto at Washington, and go all the way through the night. And I think the last game of the night was Philly at Vegas, and Vegas agreed to the 11 o'clock Eastern time start with Philly in town, so 8 o'clock local. No better market to host a late night event than Las Vegas, obviously. But we staggered the starts across the networks. We had full buy-in internally on ESPN with all of our talent and crews picking up all of the resources and logistics to help put this thing on. And it was something that I think it had promise, but it was so well received in the moment and immediately following that I think we're onto something here. And we're going to potentially look at doing it next season on a couple of occasions to essentially try to cut through in a time of year where, outside of opening night, hockey let's be honest, it struggles to cut through a little bit because of all the other things that are going on here in the U.S. Beginning NFL season, beginning of college football season, MLB playoffs, NBA's just starting up. It's a real opportunity for hockey to cut through a little bit, and doing something like the Frozen Frenzy where you get all 32 teams going on one night and you get a casual fan to tune in, even if it's for just 15 to 30 minutes. We watch hockey constantly, Sean, you and I. We know how exciting it can be. But when you have all 32 teams in action and there's no break for intermission, it actually makes for wonderful TV. And the passion that our talent share and all of our crews share internally for the sport of hockey, it was on full display last October, where we pulled off the first ever Frozen Frenzy, and we couldn't be more excited about doing it again.
So you mentioned that we talked about, obviously, staggered starts, the Frozen Frenzy. We talk about staggered starts in the playoffs. So are you the person I need to be asking so we can get a couple, like on these Tuesday nights when every single game's at 7 o'clock? Like, are you the person, should I be trying to enlist your help to try to get a couple, maybe 7:15 so I can not have 6 intermissions at once on a general Tuesday night?
I will say that on the Eastern time zone games that we select exclusively for ESPN Plus, we have strategically scheduled them at 7:30 Eastern time to ensure that if you are an ESPN Plus subscriber, that at 7:45-ish, 8 o'clock, you're not, stuck in the intermission wasteland looking for live hockey. We have, made the change internally to put those games at 7:30 to ensure that the people who do come in to watch their outer market teams, all of a sudden, when they go to intermission, they pop right into the exclusive game, and it just makes for a much more seamless viewing experience for a hockey fan. And I think we've started to see those gains in some of our data and metrics that suggest that we're onto something there as well, and we're going to continue to do that.
I wanted to ask another scheduling thing. I had a fan who's based in Dallas bring this up to me, so you might kind of guess a little bit where I'm going with this. They're looking at, and they brought up the point where it's 8:30, like I think it was an 8:30 local start last night in Dallas for that game. How important is that 7 o'clock line? Because we always see, like, we never see games start before 7. I mean, we see Western teams sometimes start a little bit later than they would, but we never really see an Eastern team start earlier or anything like that. And so I'm curious, from an industry perspective, your expertise, like, is that 7 o'clock line vital? Like, I'm kind of curious on that.
I don't want to say it's vital. I do think there's a standard, right? The precedent's been set. We've also seen teams over the years. I can remember back when, I think the Rangers played all their games at 7:30 Eastern time, and now they're all at 7 local. I think there are markets that are willing to potentially experiment with earlier start times. It probably depends on the team and the gate that's associated with a start time. But as you saw with not only our Frozen Frenzy triple header, where it was Toronto at Washington at 6 o'clock, but 2 weeks before that, for the opening night triple header for the first time ever, we got tremendous buy-in from Tampa, and it was Nashville at Tampa to start off our ESPN triple header, leading into Connor Bedard's debut in Pittsburgh, and then finally the nightcap with the Stanley Cup banner ceremony in Vegas. There are markets that are willing to test it out a little bit, and we were certainly thankful for Tampa's willingness to do that. And I think I don't want to say anything is sacred anymore, right? We're seeing, I think there's an NBA playoff game tomorrow at 5:30 Eastern time in Indiana. It does feel like there's a little bit more experimentation with start times taking place in certain markets, and it does intrigue us, that's for sure. We'll see where it goes. Obviously, our long-standing programming at 6 o'clock Eastern time with SportsCenter is our signature show, but on occasion, as you can see with our scheduling strategy this past year, we saw a couple games start before the usual 7 o'clock local, and that was it was greeted with tremendous success.
You mentioned Connor Bedard, and that's actually kind of another great segue here. With he comes into the league, and obviously he was heavily featured in national broadcasts this year, both
Sure.
for you and for ESPN and Turner. When you look at him, and Prashanth, my co-host, and I on this show have spoken before about how he represents an opportunity for this league, and I kind of wanted to open the floor to you. When you look at what Bedard brings coming into the market he's in, what excites you most about when you look at what he brings into this fold right now?
Well, it's instant name recognition in a market that loves hockey. Chicago is one of the top 5 markets in the country. We certainly leaned into his debut on opening night, and then we strategically scheduled the Blackhawks throughout the fall, knowing that he would be on full display. The prospects of the Blackhawks season were not very high in terms of making the playoffs. So there was a little bit of strategy with, okay, how do we want to use our 8 Chicago Blackhawks appearances throughout the season so that we maximize the audience expectations surrounding the unanimous number one draft picks debut with an original 6 team. So you saw it with opening night. The Blackhawks opened with, it wasn't just us, it was also our friends at Turner who wanted to get the Blackhawks on their opening night coverage on Wednesday night. So it was a back-to-back for Chicago to start the season. But the amount of eyeballs that tuned in over those 2 nights, clearly it was a tremendous success. And I think moving forward with the Blackhawks, as they're, undergoing their rebuild and trying to get back to a more competitive level, we're obviously keeping an eye on that. Whenever you can get the Blackhawks on TV, it's usually a positive story in terms of the amount of people who tune in, but to also have a world-class talent that has definitely met expectations. I could argue he's actually exceeded those expectations in his first year. He's absolutely going to be a part of our schedule moving forward. And, I think there are 2 other teams this year that we were thrilled about. One was Detroit, a market that is they're as hockey crazy as anyone, and to see Detroit hang in there and take it all the way down to the final night of the regular season to find out if they made the Stanley Cup playoffs. To add depth to the Eastern Conference was a tremendous storyline. And also, we saw some strong numbers with Tampa and Buffalo as well throughout the regular season. I know Buffalo ended up falling out of the playoff race later on, but the eyeballs for and the passion for Buffalo when they're good is really strong as well. So I think moving forward, we obviously are always trying to keep an eye on future storylines, but showcasing number 1 draft picks is not unique to hockey. We do it in the NBA all the time. We obviously do it in the NFL. There's tons of number 1 draft picks everywhere, and that capitalizing on that hype is something that we obviously will lean into moving forward.
Yeah, it's and we have a lot of listeners to this show in the Detroit area, so they'll definitely agree with me on this statement. But I believe the NHL is a lot better product when the Detroit Red Wings are relevant, as opposed to what they've gone through to get back to this point.
Yeah, we actually made a scheduling change halfway through the regular season where we saw Detroit was right there, and we made a programming switch where we picked up Florida at Detroit. I think it was the first weekend in March, and put them on ABC, and that was an electric atmosphere. I think Florida ended up winning that game, but it's a clear indication that we are keeping an eye on teams, and if we find a storyline that makes sense to swap a game out here or there, we will do that. And I believe that game was one of our stronger games all year on ABC. And we also had the storyline of Edmonton going for the consecutive wins record when they got hot towards the end of December and made that run through the All-Star break. We were attempting to get their game at Anaheim on a Friday night in early February for the potential to break the record for consecutive wins. It unfortunately wasn't to be. They ran into those pesky Golden Knights. But we're always looking for those storylines and trying to tell the story of the season. We all know it's a long regular season, but there are tremendous storylines everywhere, and elevating them onto our platforms will only help bring in the casual fan more.
Talk hockey and the Detroit, Buffalo, you talk about those ones sit in the quote unquote traditional hockey hotbed, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned Tampa though, and obviously they've won 2 cups in recent years, so that they're a team that is pretty close to won 2 cups, been to a cup, another final 3 and 4 years. But when you talk about them being the strong viewership, is that surprising at all? Is that something that has been the norm with them? Like, what's kind of that's a team where when you look at the map, they don't fit with those other ones geographically.
I think what you saw with Tampa and what you're continuing to see with Tampa is they just have a winning culture, and people recognize Tampa as a hockey market now, and. Frankly, you're probably starting to see the building of a hockey market in Fort Lauderdale and Sunrise with the team right across the state. And now they're playing each other in the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. But no, I think when you have a team that goes to the Stanley Cup final and then they win 2 cups and you go to 3 finals in 3 years, you're getting the biggest stage possible. And you're competing at the highest level and at the pinnacle of the regular season, there's going to be a casual audience that tunes in, and you start getting the player recognition factor, right? Steven Stamkos, Nikita Kucherov, Andrei Vasilevsky, like Victor Hedman. Those guys are stalwarts in Tampa, and they are now household names here in the United States after the run they went on. And I think it's just something that, with any hockey market, maybe it's going to happen with Vegas, right? They win the cup last year. They're up 2-0 on Dallas right now, probably going to make a deep run here. It could happen with Vegas where you get a Western Conference market that builds over time with multiple cups, and all of a sudden they're an anchor that you can kind of tie up to with regards to TV scheduling and put them in spots to see them succeed. So, with Tampa, I think it's just name recognition, and people watch winners, and to see Tampa over the last few years do it was a fun watch, and I would expect those numbers to continue moving forward.
There's a joke there that neither of us will make right now about watching winners and Buffalo's playoff streak right now and them somehow being highly up there, but I'll leave that to myself right now. No. When it comes to, you talked about Bedard. You mentioned some names. We talked about Tampa, the Stamkoses, the Kucherovs of the world. Are you starting to see, you're now 3 years into this process, and one of the pushbacks that people always get in hockey is we don't see enough player personality. We don't see that. That's what have been the historical kind of qualms with it, where the NBA has always been very star-driven. Are you seeing, in your kind of view of it, are you seeing players being more open to that type of promotion of the game? Like, how's that evolution gone in your mind here?
Look, I think a personality that has been on full display over the past couple years was Jack Hughes. I know he got injured earlier this year and was out with a shoulder injury, but our own Emily Kaplan sat down with him, did a player profile with him, and seemingly his post-game press conferences are always must watch because of the quotes he tends to drop in there. But, our goal is to try to showcase these personalities. For years, it's, in the hockey world, it's always been tough to get access, but I think now, the trust factor between ESPN and the media partners and the NHL, it takes time. And I think you're starting to see those personalities start to come through a little bit more often. I think our reporting on Connor Bedard last year leading up to the NHL draft lottery and then the NHL draft, I think had something to do with the amount of exposure that parlayed into early on this year with the game schedule. We saw it was the most watched first round of the NHL draft ever last June. And obviously, we're trying to look at what we do with the NFL draft annually across ESPN and all of our networks. And all the buy-in we have with college football, there's kind of a framework of how we want to help develop the star player. And Connor Bedard was kind of our first time getting a a lock number one pick and a name that everyone could recognize. And all of a sudden he's a household name in the Chicago market, despite Chicago not being very competitive. Those little things that we do, telling stories along the way throughout the year, all go towards helping tell the story of the season and these players' personalities. We all want more access, and that's what we are constantly striving to get. And then on top of that, throughout our playoff coverage, our intermission reports offer ample opportunity for player interviews and other features to run. And then our studio show, The Point, that airs on ESPN2 throughout the playoffs on game nights, is also another opportunity for us to showcase those storytelling opportunities. And the league has done a fantastic job with the player media tour and allowing all media partners to get time with 2 players from each team in the days leading up to the regular season. Making the players available to the media partners is invaluable in terms of that access. It just helps us capture so much content before the stresses of the season take over that allow for us to get it in the can and then help maybe tell a story a few months down the line when we know we have a big matchup with, Jack Eichel and the Vegas Golden Knights on our air. We can then tap into that content we captured with Jack back at the Player Media Tour and then package it and put it on the air to help tell the story of that particular game later on in the season.
And that's an example, when you have the Crosby and Bedard and kind of the same promo stuff, that's when you're kind of collecting that type of stuff, right?
Exactly. Yeah. We, as part of the promotion to opening night, there's no question Sidney Crosby's been front and center promoting the Penguins for years now, and to get time between Connor and Sidney to help promote opening night certainly helped elevate the storyline heading into that particular game. And then you saw it. It was the most watched regular season game on cable ever, at least an indoor regular season game on cable ever. And we couldn't have been more thrilled with the outcome there.
And you mentioned the indoor, but I believe this was the first year. Was it this year or last season? You took over the stadium series, correct? Was it last season?
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah. When it comes to the outdoor games, because that's one of the things from the prior rights holder with NBC Sports, one of the things to give credit where it's due, the outdoor game was something that they really helped pioneer, and that really kind of was one of the lasting legacies of that TV contract, obviously before now with the Turner and ESPN era. When it comes to the outdoor games, in your perspective now, as part of the TV product, where are they in kind of the evolution of it? Is it something where we're at a right amount? Do we need to be what's kind of your view on the state of the outdoor game right now?
Well, you couldn't have asked for a more entertaining stadium series this past year at MetLife Stadium with the 2 games back-to-back days. I'm just still thankful we got good weather, because if there was a rainstorm, that would not have been pretty to reschedule. But at the same time, look, the stadium series and the Winter Classic, they are still TV draws. Outdoor hockey games pull in the casual fan, and we see it time and time again. They over-index compared to the normal regular season hockey game that airs on ESPN or TNT throughout the year. It is a monumental task to get these stadiums set up for outdoor hockey games. The venue needs to be available to host, right? The time of year, all these factors, the TV windows, there's a giant jigsaw puzzle alone with these particular games as well. From my perspective, they are not only made for TV, but they're made for the fan in the local market as well. It is, I've been fortunate enough to go to a couple of these. They're fantastic events when you're on site. Between Raleigh last year and then MetLife Stadium this year, just fantastic viewing experiences. And you're talking about opening up the aperture to allow for casual fans to take part in hockey, right? That was a college football crowd at Raleigh last year for the Carolina Hurricanes outdoor game for their stadium series. And then it was a tri-state celebration with the Devils, Flyers, Rangers, and Islanders taking part at MetLife Stadium. It's a scene, and to be a part of it, and for ESPN to have the Stadium Series is something we're looking forward to this coming year, where it'll be at Ohio Stadium at the Shoe, where Columbus Blue Jackets will host the Detroit Red Wings. Obviously, the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry will permeate throughout, and we are looking forward to that event in March of next year.
There's way too many Michigan guys on the Blue Jackets, though. It feels like there's 5 or 6 guys who played at Michigan on that team between Fantilli and Werenski and everything like that. There's a lot.
It makes for a compelling storyline, right? It also helps build. Yeah. This is the sort of thing we're talking about.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you're tying these guys and where they went to school to who they are, which is all part of getting to know who these players are, right? And another example where you're going to get to learn more about who these guys are is the Four Nations face-off next year, right? We're so used to seeing these guys wear their franchises logos, but to see Austin Matthews wearing Team USA or Connor McDavid wearing Team Canada, that's going to be a sight to behold. And there's all sorts of interesting storylines of, all of a sudden Sidney Crosby and Connor Bedard are potentially line mates as opposed to facing off against each other at center ice on opening night. There's intrigue there, and getting to know these guys about where they're from, and that will be on full display as part of the Four Nations face-off.
I have 2 more, and they both tangentially relate to Arizona, ironically enough. First one, Austin Matthews is from Arizona, so that's why this connects there. As a American personality superstar playing in Toronto, how exciting is that for the perspective of you get him in that Team USA best on best tournament next year?
It's going to be great. You hear the players talk about all the time. They just want to represent their country at the highest level, and it's an honor to do so. And to get Austin Matthews to play for Team USA will be, we're assuming he's on the team. He's going to be front and center.
I think he'll make. I think he'll make it. I think he'll make the cut
69
on that one.
goals this year. I think he's okay. I think for us, getting a guy like Austin Matthews on TV here in the U.S. is a big deal. We had him obviously last night for Game 3 between the Bruins and the Maple Leafs, but getting him on more regularly to help tell the story. No, this guy's a big deal. Despite he plays in Toronto, he's a big deal, and you need to follow him. That will only help elevate his status moving forward, and to get him on the biggest stage with Team USA and potentially playing with Charlie McAvoy as his defenseman, even though last night they're playing against each other. That's good stuff. It's interesting and compelling TV to see guys, don their country's colors or their country's sweater, as opposed to just representing their franchise that they play on during the regular season. It's going to be really compelling stuff.
You mentioned at the top how a lot of there's planning, that there's a lot of jigsaw puzzles that start getting moved way ahead of time before everything goes and everything like that. This week becomes official. The Coyotes are moving to Utah to be whatever the name will be. As of right now, there's still not an official name. When it comes to telling that story, I'm curious, when you look at it as a perspective of, it's not technically a new team. The players, the coach are the same. The hockey operations are the same, but it's a new market coming in. And unfortunately, at the same time, we both know Phoenix is a big market. It's a top 10 media market in the United States. So there's pros and cons to this on both ends.
For sure.
How do you look at, from your perspective, the Utah story, the Salt Lake City story, and kind of telling it in the future, and where this all kind of goes from here?
Well, I think we have a little bit of a framework to work off of. In year number 1 of our TV deal, it was the inaugural game for the Seattle Kraken, right? And we had them on opening night at Vegas, and then we carried their home opener a couple weeks later when the building was finally finished. But for us, I think there's going to be intrigue. Whenever you have something brand new, you want to put it on full display. And I think whatever the mascot ends up getting, whatever the name of the franchise ends up being, there will certainly be a whole jersey reveal, and all the social that goes on behind the scenes there will be on full display. But I think for us, we want to help tell the story of the new franchise and try to put it and set it up for success in the future. I think who's going to be their rival, I think, is always kind of one of those questions. Is it going to be Denver? Are you going to go westbound to see who their rival is going to be? But I think from a storytelling perspective, obviously this was a business decision made by the league, and it was all handled outside of obviously the walls of ESPN. But for us to tell that story, to help give that franchise an opportunity to showcase what it could be in the future, that's all part of us trying to be a good partner and trying to draw in the casual fan. There's no doubt whenever there's something new in hockey, there's always like this giant rush of enthusiasm, and we want to be there to help tell that story.
Awesome. Well, hey, Eric, thank you so much for coming on to join the show. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot talking about how schedules are made, to why something goes on ESPN versus ESPN2. So I really appreciate you taking the time to go through all of that. And after the break, Prashanth and I will be back on. Thank you to everyone for listening.
Thanks a lot, Sean.
All right, folks. That was Eric, producer at ESPN. Really appreciate him taking the time to join us. And to wrap up this episode, one of the things we talked about earlier with the playoffs is, the importance of willpower, wanting to push through, who ultimately wants it more. But sometimes you can want it too much. And sometimes you end up taking those stupid penalties. And even though you've got guys like Brad Marchand, who, in the words of, Leafs coach, is elite at avoiding those penalties, there are other folks like Max Bultman who's not elite at avoiding penalties. And so, Sean, I wanted you to just take us away here with what may be one of the most, embarrassing penalties, worst penalties you've ever seen?
I don't want to say embarrassing or worse, but it's I'll just lay out the scenario because it's tremendous. So last night the Anchormen, my Wednesday night beer league team in Troy, that Max Bultman is the captain for. I've called Max the Zenon Konopka of beer league before. He's the guy who wins face-offs, does all the little annoying stuff really well, and everything like that. And so we had a game last night that. To pat myself on the back here, we won 4-0, posted the shutout, felt good. And we're playing against a team that we tend not to get along with really well, and they've got one guy who is a very amateur beer league-ish version of Brad Marchand in the way he goes about things. And late in the game, third period, he breaks one of our guys' sticks, basically lays his body on it, breaks the stick. One of our other guys slashes him, goes to the box. His stick is on the ice. Our guy shoots his stick a little bit into the neutral zone. The guy, Max, then, to all of Max's credit, goes out of his way then to take another shot at the guy's stick and send it all the way into the right corner behind the net. There is no call on that. Having flown too close to the sun, the guy who broke our guy's stick is now skating to go get his stick, and Max basically sprints to beat him to the corner to shoot his stick a little bit further along behind the net, and the ref finally gave him that. The third shooting of the opponent's stick to finally got the unsportsmanlike conduct, put us on the 5-on-3 kill for 2 minutes with about 3.5 minutes left. We killed it. We won 4-0. It's a story that is fun to tell and live to another day, but sometimes maybe the Brad Marchand factor would have been to not go and shoot the stick away a third time. It's finding the when you have that line, and Max went a little bit too far last night, but he won a couple key face-off late in the game, so we can't really blame him. So that's the story from last night with some penalties in beer league hockey here.
That's we obviously this is all done in ribbing and good fun because we both love Max so much. But I gotta say it's just absolutely hilarious to see that the troll has worn off, and that when folks are talking about someone kind of playing a little too close to the edge or kind of crossing that line, you got Max shooting a guy's stick around the net 3 times before he gets called for unsportsmanlike conduct. So I absolutely love it. And Max obviously being a tremendous friend. It's all in good nature, good fun. And so with that, we'll close out another episode here of Expected by Whom. Appreciate everybody tuning in. And for anyone who's got any questions, comments, or concerns, please direct those to the inbox of Ryan Hanna. Thanks, folks.